Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Tony Maglione with Political Pulse. We are doing the fourth of five podcasts, and the previous ones were about good and evil and the state of medicine in this country and the state of this country. And we've gotten into certain things that help us deal with the world better, and not just from a practical point of view, but also from a spiritual, physical, and mental point of view. And as a practicing doctor for many years, I give advice on all three and how they're related at all times. Today's episodes and podcast is going to be divided into two parts. The first episode today will be talking about why Trump has to be elected, why we're in a state that has to happen. And the second part is going to be on a police state. Now, I had made up this police state talk way before I even knew that Dinesh D'Souza had a movie coming out here at the end of October. And so a lot of that's going to be similar, most likely, and because it's scary what's happening in this country, and we need to be more aware of what's going on. And that'll be in the second portion. So let's begin by talking about what's happening now, that we have to be concerned about 2024 for the presidential election. There is no doubt that unless something happens to Donald Trump, he will be the nominee and will be running for president. Okay, it'll be take something that regards health or having been injured, or killed, which is also possible, because the elements on the left are fanatical. And one of the reasons that Trump has to be elected is he is the only one who has served and understands the enemy. We have an enemy within, as David Horowitz says, we have an enemy within the United States. The enemy is the left. The enemy are the people who are opening the borders, allowing human and child trafficking to run amok, that are allowing so much sinful behavior, are ruining our economy and ruining things around the world. So I'm going to go analytically, piece by piece, the way a person would analyze a certain thing scientifically and come to the obvious conclusion. Now, Trump has to be president, number one, because of his experience, and he knows what the deep state is. He understands that there are evil people in the world that want to cause a depopulation, that want people dead, including Americans. We saw that with COVID. We know that Gates and his associates are behind this, that's supported by Soros and all the other people that are in the world that want a global one world economy and one world order. But that one world order isn't good for over 99% of people in the world. It's only good for those several thousand billionaires, their families, and all the political class in about 50 or so countries that will overtake everything. And they believe that that's going to work. First of all, it won't work. It'll create such destruction that it may be good for them for a number of years, but it'll be horrible for everybody. And in the end, it'll be the end of mankind. So this fight for the presidency is one of salvation, not just in a biblical sense. It's a salvation for humanity. And if you don't grasp the seriousness of it, let's go over a few things. Just in the last, less than 3 years, what has happened that Trump did, and that this administration, and if Biden gets reelected, or whatever crony is in there and being manipulated by Obamas and the Clintons and the Soroses of the world, and the Gates and all the other rich people that are manipulating things behind the scenes, they will continue this pathway. Trump, on the other hand, spotted it. He was spending enough time that he couldn't deal with some of the deep state issues because it was so entrenched. Nobody knew it was that entrenched. He's the one that exposed it as to how bad it is. Most of us have written about it, and we exposed the waste that 2/3 of government could literally be eliminated, and we would be, and if we just did things correctly, like you do in the real world, and in a business-like fashion, rather than a government fashion, which usually is inept and incompetent, slow, and all it does is tell you a lie and say it helps you when it actually hurts you. And we know that. So Trump understands that, and the first time he got bogged down by all these false allegations, the Russia hoax and then the Ukraine phone call, all of these things are hoax, just like all these hoaxes now to keep him from talking or to keep him from running with all these lawsuits. These are just all injustices. This is just the way the left operates now. They're evil. And the left is, unfortunately, supported by 95 to 98% of Democrats and by a few less than 5 to 10% of others, including independents and Republicans. And they support this because they somehow think they'll be in that elite and that there'll be that little less than a million people in the world who are, yes, a little less than a million people in the world who'll be in charge of everybody else. We have about 8 billion people in the world. So literally 99% of the world will be enslaved and will have a government that actually is just tyrannical on a daily basis. And many of us will get killed or be imprisoned because we see the nonsense. We see how, number one, how anti-biblical, anti-God it is. Trump doesn't, and he's proved it. I'm going to start with his good things, all the good things he did. We're going to go foreign affairs first and then get into the domestic affairs. And so for everybody that doesn't understand, he was a king at foreign affairs. He did a great job, similar to Reagan. We haven't had a person handle things as well since Reagan on the foreign affairs front. He neutralized China. China didn't do anything. They were getting weaker. If people understand China, they really blew it with all the abortions they had, and only that people can only have one child. Excuse me. They're going to have to compensate. They're going to have to make people have 2 or 3 children now. They have to totally go in reverse because their labor force is dying. And so economically, what Trump was doing was weakening them to the point where they'll self-implode. And now that got reversed and China got strengthened since Biden's been there. So if you're a fan of communism, oppression, tyranny, and you vote for Biden or his surrogate, whoever it is. Because on world affairs, he neutralized China, he neutralized Russia, he neutralized North Korea completely, kept the peace, got rid of ISIS, and he told Europe that they have to pay their fair share for the defense of Europe. Why should we be not only paying the majority, but also being the ones putting our own men and women at risk? So he was doing things that were practical, that were fair. There was an unfairness before. And he also built our military and improved our economy, so we had peace through strength. We didn't have any major wars. Didn't occur. What happened now in Israel would have occurred and didn't occur when Trump was in office. They waited. And now, as soon as Trump wasn't reelected, they began planning this attack from Gaza. And I am, pro-Israeli. I'm also pro-truth. The idea that Palestinian had a state that they want back never existed. It's just like climate change and all the misinformation medically when we had the COVID. It's just a pure lies. They're just lies. The Palestinians never had their own state. They were offered one in 47 before the 48th Division, 1948, through the UN. Excuse me. And they refused. They could have had their own piece of land, but they chose not to. In fact, they chose to fight a few days later with Egypt on their side and Lebanon and Syria and Jordan, and they lost. They tried again in 67 and lost. They tried again in 73 and lost. And now they're trying again in 2023. And obviously, if you're pro-Palestinian, you're pro-beheading children and babies, you're pro-killing innocent civilians, and you're not oppressed. They could have done anything they wanted. The other countries that are Arab could have taken in most of the 2 million people that are in Gaza. And then, again, there's I don't know how many exactly in the West Bank, 2 million. Of course, these other countries can absorb 4 million. Many of them, have populations between 25 and 50, 60 million people. So there's no reason they couldn't absorb them, but they didn't. Because they're not pro the Palestinians, even they don't want them because they cause trouble. Because eventually they are just a terrorist organization that, for those of us that are old enough, know it started with Yasser Arafat. The PLO, which wasn't a liberation organization, was actually just a way to try to kill and exterminate the Jews. I mean, they're no different than the Nazis. It's the same belief. It's the same goal. And he did it. Trump said, no, this is not happening. In fact, we're going to be biblical and make Jerusalem the capital, which was the right move. He's the president that did it, and he had courage to do so. So in foreign affairs, we've had peace and we've had strength economically to maintain the peace. So we have to bring back somebody who has common sense and is a strong leader and will make sure our military doesn't get woke and that our defense of our country is good, but which means also closing our borders, which he was doing. If he had had the second term, he would have done that. And we know what happened with the election. We're not going to get into that today. So he was strong on foreign affairs, on every aspect of it. He was strong on the domestic affairs, economically, best economy that we've ever had, depending on the parameter, not in every aspect, but in terms of improving the job situation and the income of all minorities, Hispanic, blacks, women, Asians. They all did better under Trump more than any other president in history. Yet, he gets no credit. Biden did worse. Biden is a disaster. Economic policy, if anybody has any common sense and any knowledge of mathematics and simple principles of economics, they would know this is a policy to destroy the America, which is what they're doing. I mean, we know that behind the scenes, they're trying to destroy America. Like, if you hate this country, which obviously the majority of Democrats do, not just majority, but all of them. Now, some of them don't know. Some of them are naive. Some have been brainwashed that they actually believe all these lies. But the fact is, from a scientific point of view, the economic indexes were all improved. Inflation low, jobs high. We were getting to a point where we can start considering decreasing our debt in the next 4 years of Trump. But obviously that can't happen because now if he gets reelected, he's going to have a little bit of debt to reinforce the military. But hopefully he can do cuts in all the other departments and divisions that will help so that we don't have an increasing debt, because that's going to be a problem for the future. So economically, he did great. He did great on other things, including the border. But he also kept us free. You see, right now we have tyranny, and that part of the tyranny will be the second part of this podcast, will be on the police state. Because we have a police state right now. We have tyranny in our country for the first time. We've never had tyranny before. We have it. We're one party. Those are the Trump supporters. The, whatever it was, 64, 73 million Trump supporters, 74 million Trump supporters. Somehow we're despicable. We're the enemy. You've got departments in the FBI, and I'll get into that in the police state, Department of Justice, who doesn't see terrorism as a problem or criminals as a problem, but sees good people, parents, and good Americans who believe in God and believe in this country as the problem. You can only see that if you hate this country, if you want to destroy it, which is what is being done under the Biden administration. So he was correct also on the fact of closing the borders, improving the economy to a point where we became energy independent. The Biden immediately stopped our energy independence and reversed it and made us dependent on our enemies. Biden has shown he's given money to Iran, and he's been weak with Iran. He's been weak, with Russia, and Ukraine now has a mess. And he only creates an atmosphere where we are more vulnerable to violence, terrorism, and eventually acquire so much debt that we can't get out of it. And I believe that strategy to be evil and purposeful by the leaders of the Democratic Party. Excuse me again. Sorry about that. I've had that problem all morning. So, to sum up, Trump's done everything right except for one area. But before I get to that area, the other thing he did right was, even though he is not the most virtuous, righteous man, although I think he's becoming more because he loves his country so much, and he and his family have suffered so much by trying to do what's right. Our country became great again in the sense that, under his administration, we got 3 Supreme Court justices, and the deciding vote was Amy Barrett, Judge Barrett, on reversing Roe versus Wade. And that's important because that's besides slavery, that's the other big sin and scar in this country. Now, there's other sins that are occurring, and that's the race baiting and the race division and the lying press and the stealing of assets by many politicians, more on the left than on the right, and all the other criminal activities that are being twisted, where the criminals are getting away with stealing and violence, and good people are being put away in jail as political prisoners. And that is just terrible. But we know, and that's why we have less free country now. And we can get freedom again, only under Trump. All the other candidates are not terrible. Some are good, of the Republican candidates, but none of them can do what Trump did because he knows the job. So he'll do all the good things. And the one bad thing he did, for a year, he believed, from March of 2020 to about March of 2021, he believed the hype from Fauci and Birx and, did a disservice. And I wish he would admit that he and the others on his staff believed people who were not good. They didn't vet Fauci or realize what he had done in the 80s. And I've talked about that before. Fauci has been an evil sinner his whole career. He's a terrible, terrible human being, along with Gates and others. These are very bad people. But because they don't care. They want more people to die. They lie. They don't even know what the truth is. Because even if you listen to him in the first 6 months of the pandemic, he reversed his position 4 or 5 times before he got to the position, you should wear 2, 3 masks. He's insane, okay? His advice is insane. But the fact is, and I say it as a doctor, look, and those that believe him and those in the Democratic Party, they have an illness too. It's called delusion. They're delusional because they believe a lie. It's because one of the things I talked about earlier in one of the podcasts, you have to learn how to get at the truth. You only get at that if you know right from wrong. When you don't know right from wrong and you do evil, you'll never get at the truth. It'll never occur to get there. So that's one thing he can improve on and get better people in the health industry. I actually applied to be the number 2 person in the health department and did not get that job because I knew of the corruption that goes on in the FDA and the CDC, and I understood what was at stake, especially if a pandemic happened and the left taking advantage of the opportunity that caused misery. And they exacerbated it with their lockdowns and masks and mandates and all the things that they did to make everything worse for basically the working class and all the people who are mostly the Trump supporters. They did it on purpose because they have so much to hide of the things that they've done that are evil, and it'll come out eventually. I may not be alive, but that information will come out unless the world ends before then. And the truth will come out. We'll find its way. But that I'm sure of, if, like I said, if God doesn't take us first, because the rapture and the end of the world may come before we know it. The way we are sinning right now as a country, we're terrible. We are responsible for half of the money put in to the human trafficking world, of which there are 8 million children and 32 million adults. And these are slavery. In other words, the very people who are against, who say they're victims of slavery, which they weren't, their great ancestors were, are the ones supporting the candidate that is creating an open border and more slavery in the world. And that slavery mostly is in areas of color, or they're in Africa and in the Middle East. But, nobody wants to tell the truth about these things. So we can get, and he will also crack down, Trump, on violence, and maybe we can start talking about the facts. All the stuff that happens with black on black or black on white and white on black, all that talk about defunding the police, all a complete lie. And the people who believe it don't understand this was just a Marxist movement to create more division and hate in our society. The real facts, and I'll just give a couple of them, is that black on white crime is 10 times, when you compare apples to apples, is 10 times more a problem than white on black. So therefore, if you have the same number of blacks and the same number of whites, blacks will do violent felony crimes against whites 10 times more than whites will on blacks. So the problem isn't a white cop doing a black criminal, because 98% of the time the deaths are from people who are in the middle of criminal activity or running away from criminal activity and don't do as they're told to when you're arrested. And so that's the reality. But they can lie about it because they want to be victims. Actually, the victim is, when you look at the numbers in different parts over the last 25 years, this is statistics that comes from the same government, the United States government. And there are certain statistics that come out that show that twice as many whites die from the hands of cops than blacks when you correct it for the percentage of violent crime. And so you have to compare apples to apples. In other words, you can't look at, because one population is 1/4 or 1/5 the other population, that somehow you can look at two numbers and say they're equal. You have to then put in the factor of the difference in the proportion of population. And in science, we do that. We just say per 100,000 or per 1,000 of that population, this is the crime incidence. And when you look at it and compare apples to apples, the same number to the same number, there are 10 times more hate cross-race crimes done by blacks than by whites. Now, it's a small percentage of blacks because there's only about, 1 million black young men that generally do all these crimes, and there's, 42 million blacks approximately in the United States. But they're doing more crime than the whites in general, and doing it by a factor of tenfold, which is 1,000% more. Pretty significant. And it's 100% more that cops kill whites over killing blacks. And the reason is not the exact number, but proportionate to who does the violent crime. You have to, in science, if you want to get certain results, you have to compare the same two things. So, to sum up, Trump needs to be elected because we have to stop, have a more secure border, have less violence, have less terrorism in our country, have a better economic future, have a stronger military, have a deterrence to have peace in the world, be able to deal better with our enemies, and improve us not just economically and in terms of safety, but improve us also morally. We were going in the right direction. So for every reason, we have to make sure that the Republican Party, at least in about 10 states, in the big cities, has a lot of people overlooking the vote that happens on election night. Because if they're going to do what they did before in 2020, they're going to do it after all the votes are in, and then all of a sudden, all these extra ballots will pop up in order to make somebody they wish to be a winner. And sorry about that. That's my timer. So I'm going to stop here. The next part of this is going to be on a police state. And again, another reason to vote for Trump and make sure he gets elected. Get involved as much as you can with the voting at the polls and the people who overlook things. So thank you. I'm Dr. Tony Maglione. This was Political Pulse, and I'll be back shortly. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Tony Maglione. You are listening to Political Pulse. This is the second part of my fourth podcast. I'll be doing 5 before the end of the year. And today we're going to talk about the police state. And as you know, I've done things before on the previous podcast that covered the areas of what's wrong with our country, what's wrong with our medical system. We talked about things in terms of how to think, how to find out what's good and what's evil so that we can know right from wrong. And if you know these things, it becomes very self-evident when people have gone away from God and are now committing evil. And so today's talk on the police state is something that I planned to do at the end of July when I was going to do these 5 episodes on a monthly basis. And I did not know that Dinesh D'Souza was doing a documentary on a police state. And I'm sure we're going to cover many of the same issues. He does a great job. I would love to have 100 of Dinesh D'Souza's to keep bringing out the truth, bringing out the light. Because when the truth gets suppressed, it's just pure darkness. And these have an impact on how people act, how they are brainwashed, how they become automatrons, how they become more and more naive and controlled and dummied down. And this is why a police state can occur. So as we begin, let's talk about the actual police state. What is it? Well, a police state is one in which individuals lose their rights. Now, we have the greatest nation in the world because we're the only nation that, as a republic, the country is run by its citizens, not by its government, by its citizens. And the reason for that is our rights are endowed by God. This is how our country created. And that's why on the other side, left, has to get rid of the concept of God. They have to be against Christians and Jews and anybody else who's religious and wants to lead a righteous life. And because if they don't do that, there'll always be a counter to the evil they're trying to do, which is about control. And in the minds of the few that are controlling it, they will be the only ones in power, less than 1% of people, the globalists, the elitists in the world. And the rest will be under their thumb. Initially, it'll be the people that oppose them, that are religious and tell the truth. And eventually, it'll be 99% of the people that supported them. They're just too naive to know their plan. And that's why I say to them, wake up. And I pray to God that many of them can wake up. Many of us have our own family members. So we know a police state is when you lose your freedom. We see example after example. Look what they've done with the law and Trump, a gag order against his First Amendment right. They've taken away so many of his amendment rights to a speedy trial, to an ability to actually face their accuser. Because now when you gag the leading candidate to become president of the United States of a party, you actually not only do election interference, you actually also allow their enemies to keep talking and bring him down, which is what they do. They've done it nonstop since 2013, 15 pretty much at one point when he announced running for presidency. They have lied about him. The lies have been proven about the Russian collusion, the phone calls to Ukraine. Everything that he's done is right. All these lawsuits against him are frivolous and are just political and are just meant to keep him out of office. Why would you want to do that? The question is, as a doctor, I always ask the question, why? Why is somebody going in a direction that doesn't make any sense? Why are they ruining this country? Why are they allowing people to be trafficked and enslaved? Because that's what the left does. If you're a Democrat, you're part of the slavery party, because that's what happens when you have open borders and you allow this degree of human trafficking where 40 million people are enslaved in the world, and 8 million children. Just pure evil. So the way you get to a police state is this process where you vilify the good guys and you keep saying you're the good guys when you're the evil ones and that you're doing people good. Look, I grew up, I knew people, friends, and who were in the mob. The mob, like, oh, we're going to protect you, and you feel protected. You're not going to get robbed, or nothing bad's going to happen to your family. Nobody's going to come around and kill and rape your wife or daughter. But in return, they're going to siphon off money from you. That's not freedom. That's being a crook. It's completely illegal. Well, what a evil government does, and it started, the evilness started mostly with Obama, but there are traces of it even with Clinton, and I'm not going to go into all the details, but the fact is, a police state starts when they don't go by the same rules as they apply to you. What happens is eventually a form of tyranny, and it becomes progressive. We have a degree of tyranny, as I stated, early January of 2021, that our country now has tyranny for the first time in its history. And now we have the worst kind of tyranny ever in our history. And it's demonstrated by this police state. Now, how do they enforce this police state? Well, number one, they've already had control of the educational system for decades. They've had control of the media for even longer than that. They have control of Hollywood. They have control of Washington, D.C., the hub of power. So therefore, all they needed to do was start to enforce this police state slowly but slowly by picking on the innocent. Again, what they are doing is they're going after the innocent, like Trump and like all of us, and they are protecting the guilty. Because anybody who knows anything about what's been going on knows that, Biden is guilty as anything, him, his son, his family, for all this money laundering, and it's against with our enemies. So, I mean, basically, there's no doubt in my mind that if we actually had fairness, he'd be accused of treason and possibly, be killed for this. We know Obama is even worse. He's been with the devil a much longer time. The Obamas, the Clintons, and they have done things to protect the terrorist. All the money that Obama gave to Iran, dollars, bringing it over on a plane. Just incredible. I mean, total tyranny. Absolute. Eventually, people will know the things that went on. It's not talking with the Bidens and everything. There's so much degree of sexual impropriety and sinning to such a great degree. And the reason to do that is because there are not just psychopaths. They are not just sociopaths, they are psychopaths. They actually love to hurt other people. And you can see that in the fact the United States has paid for half the revenue of human trafficking by paying for things that allow for child sex slavery and for actually mutilation and watching kids get body parts cut off or even killed. People pay for that. It's sickening. This is all happening from the left. This is all allowed by the Hollywood people and the Washington, D.C. people, the politicians, and the people in power. Now, who are these people that want this police state? Because, see, there are police states already in the world. The Putins of the world, the Maos previously, and now Xi in China. What they do is they rule by killing their opponents, doing things to actually hurt anybody who has an opposing view. They ruin their lives, imprison them, or kill them. And guess what? We're at an earlier stage of that, where we're ruining their lives, or imprisoning them. And we're not that far from killing, but we haven't gotten there yet with our tyranny. Because all the good people, look at January 6th, probably over 1,000 people who deserve misdemeanor charges, and only a few maybe deserve jail time. Yet they imprisoned them, didn't give them rights, didn't give them a speedy trial. They ignore the Constitution. That's what happens with Xi and Putin and other, people who actually ignore anything that is decent in this world of how to treat other human beings. And because they're godless. Because to be godless means you're not going to love your neighbor. It's pretty simple. Being a Christian or believing in God means you're going to love God and love your neighbor. That's your number one thing. Therefore, you're not going to do these things to them. So the police state occurs when there are people that are basically have mental illness. You won't hear it said, but I'll say it. I'm a doctor. I know they're mentally ill because they believe in themselves. They're so delusional. They believe in their super God ability to control others, whether it's Gates or Soros or Krauss, the Bidens, Obamas, the Clintons, all of these people. They are extremely extreme. Most of the Democrats in Congress, and the difference is some of the other people I just spoke of have at least a brain. These people in Congress on the left, they're complete, utter fools. They can't even think logically about anything. And they're godless because they lie every day. Almost everything that comes out of their mouth is based on a misinformation or an untrue statement. Because their agenda is what's important, not their God, not the fact that we are here to honor God and to love our neighbor. It is just amazing that we don't have a pushback. And I think as Christians, as a biblical Christian, we have a citizenship responsibility. We need to push back as much as we can by telling people the truth. The truth is we have a police state. We have tyranny. It's just at a certain degree. We have people who are leaders of movements for pro-life who go in front of abortions clinics, the distance they're allowed to go, and they speak sometimes to the people entering it and trying to save a person's life or give them literature. And yet they're harassed. If there's somebody who's doing it successfully, they get picked by our government. Now, who are these people in the government that are doing these things? It's the Department of Justice, it's the FBI, it's the IRS, it's the Department of Homeland Security, it's big business, big tech, judges, and district attorneys. We've seen the district attorneys, the example I gave earlier, and judges who are totally not following the Constitution, not following the rule of law. Our DOJ doesn't follow it. Garland and others, Jack Smith, they could care less because they are very bad human beings. And I say it, I'm not the one doing the judgment. I pray that all of these people eventually repent and turn their way to God. It has been my experience in almost 70 years on earth that that is unlikely. But I pray that it does, because we're going to love our neighbor. I hate what they're doing. They're hurting many of God's children. Somebody like Fauci, the bureaucrats, evil as anything. He's killed millions with what he's done. He's hurt many. If people knew all the experiments he did in inner cities to poor people, people on welfare, etc., they would be shocked at how evil this man is. And yet nobody could get that information to Trump to shut him down in March or April of 2020. I tried, but I just didn't have the connections to do so. I tried. We tried to get through a friend who knew one of the Republican governors in this country, and we got that information, but it just didn't go through. So all I can tell you is we have a situation where evil is dominant, and there's a tyrannical sense where there's justice for the people that are the enemies of the state that wants power and control over you. For those people who don't know, Obamacare was not about increasing people's health in this country. See, because now the medical system's been ruined because it's all about a monopoly working with the government, the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, and the big tech, because they want to get these people, the heads of these people, the few thousand people, to be part of the elite, the cabal, I'm sorry, when they will eventually, in their minds, rule the world. Unfortunately, that's not, it's unrealistic because we know what's going to happen. We know that Russia, if they had an opportunity, would want to be the leader of the world. If China had the opportunity, they want to be the leader of the world. They don't want a one world order. They want to be in charge of the world. And so they're so naive that they think they can do it, but it won't happen because, number one, they're fairly incompetent at actually running things. Their goals of how to do their economy, their moral structure, there's more violence. They create that, and they think that that's going to give them a chance to get power because they're the ones who are going to save the day. Well, they've never saved the day. They've only created more wars, more hatred, more division than anybody else. So our police state is there to intimidate and harass and discourage people from telling the truth or for running against them. This deep state that Trump, and none of us had idea how deep it is. Many of us knew it was so gross. I mean, people heard me talking 12, 13 years ago. And even in my book, to try to we can decrease the government by at least a third without hurting anything. And even more, most likely. And we could streamline and get rid of many of the departments, at least several of them. And we can do that without hurting anything because we can give back the power to the states. We need to be a smaller government. Our founding fathers, that was their intention. They knew these could become problems. They knew parties can become problems because it becomes more about the party than about serving people. That's why the Democrats almost always, 98% of the time, vote all in mass, all the same. There's just a few individuals who might vote a little differently. And that's because they're good party people and they don't care. The party has gone so much to the left. Like I said, the left, whether you're a Democrat now, you are the party of bigotry and racism. You are the party of lying. You are the anti-God party. You are the anti-American party. We saw what happened with the protest against Jews and the attacks here in this country and throughout the world over, the invasion of Hamas, a terrorist group. Now, they need to be eliminated, just like ISIS was eliminated. And people may not remember, but Obama, the evil person that he was, helping terrorism, he's the one who didn't really wipe out ISIS. He just did he had rules of engagement that wouldn't happen. And he fooled around for it for 3 years, and a lot of people got to die. A lot of Christians got to die, even Muslims. But he didn't care because he's a mass murderer. He could care less. Trump gets there to solve the problem. Within a couple of months, ISIS is eliminated. Now it's come back as Hamas. There's Hezbollah, similar people, just like Hamas. They are, Iranian-backed, and they are trained to die because death is what they want. Because they've been convinced that if they die, they go to heaven, even if they kill hundreds or thousands of people. And that, like I said, that's literally delusional. It's psychopathic. It goes against anything everybody's ever known. And, as you know, part of the Quran encourages that. There was a peaceful part of the Quran and there's the more violent part of the Quran. And we know now just about more people in Gaza and more of the Palestinians, they agree with Hamas to exterminate the Jews and have one state of Palestine. By the way, Palestine was never a state. Never just was in certain territories and lived in territories. Whereas Israel was a state. It was a state given to God, to Abraham, became, under Moses, we started having, kings, and we ended up having a government, the Israeli government, all the way in a state, until they were taken down by the Babylonians, and eventually they come back. They were state again. Then they build their temple again, and they got taken down by the Romans. And then the Romans let them coexist, and then tried to ruin them in 70 A.D. as predicted by Jesus. They tried to ruin them, and they tried to change it because the Romans at that time became anti-Semitic. But people don't want to understand history. And then it became a state again in 1948. The Palestinians had a chance to become a state on several occasions. The UN allowed the Palestinians to have land, and instead of doing that, they said no and attacked Israel, and they were able to defend themselves. Outnumbered, remember, it's 22 countries to 1. 22 Arab countries to 1. Muslims in the world, close to 1.5 billion. Jews in the world, close to 18 million. What possible threat is there? Does Israeli ever attack the Muslim world? Never. The only time they actually preempted the attack was when they got intel and information back in '67, because there was a spy working in the Egyptian government, and they knew that Nasser was about to try to come in and annihilate the Jews. And so these are the stories. These are the historical facts. If people want to look that stuff up, they can. So what's going to happen here in this country? Well, if we don't get Trump in office in 2024, because he'll change that. He knows exactly what's going on. He's excellent on foreign affairs. He has his pulse on this. He knows the deep state players now. He will effect a change. He will start to prosecute some of the people that are behind this. He will have his Department of Justice, a clean one, actually go after the criminals now and protect the innocent. He will close the border. He will stop, the amount of human trafficking that's occurring, at least from our end over our border in the world. And these are the things that actually we need, because if we don't stop it now, they're only going to get worse. And if they ever get power again, they're going to go right back to it. They can't help themselves. They are literally possessed. They're demonic. They're possessed, and they are evil. They're delusional. They love their power. They would hate for people like me. I'm sure they would want to shut me down. Look, I've been shut down in the past by Twitter, Facebook, numerous times. I've been shut down recently by YouTube for telling the truth. I stand by it, and actually my response with them, I pray for them, because they have lost their soul and they don't know what the truth is. They're so brainwashed, so naive, or some of them actually may be evil. They actually know this is all a lie, and they're just doing it to get power and control. Again, we can't judge each individual motive, but we know some people well enough. We know the Bidens, Soroses, and Obamas and Clintons, and know the degree of evil, all of them. But, we'll pray. So I'm going to, also tell you that I'm not going to just say that this is happening. It's what can we do about it? We have to now, in medicine, you have to find the problem. We know what the problem is. We know if it's untreated, what's going to be the result. We're all going to lose our freedoms. They're going to not just take our money and take our property. They're going to control us, and we're going to be essentially trafficked as slaves in this country by these evil people. Initially, it'll be the people who oppose them, like us, the people who are Christian and believe in God and think this is a great country. And eventually it'll be even the people that support them, because their goal, they could care less. They're just like Hamas. You think they care about the Palestinians in Gaza that are Hamas? They could care less. They don't care. They use them as human shields. They're just pure evil. There's no difference between them and the Nazis and the Chinese leaders that do so many human rights violations even today. This happens whether it's in Russia, the United States, it happened in Cuba, it's happening in Venezuela. We know what evil is, and now we're evil. We are not a great country when we have the left in charge. We are a terrible country. Under Obama, under Clinton, we didn't do as bad because the husband, he was more a sexual deviant and wasn't and more of a moderate Democrat, because he had certain people in his staff that, like Dick Morris and others, that kind of helped him lead his way and cooperate with Gingrich, the Speaker of the House, to get some good legislation through for finances and everything. He still was terrible on foreign affairs, Clinton, but it doesn't matter. What we can do is make sure Trump gets in, because that's our number one goal. Number two, we can continue to pray and we continue to love our neighbors even though they're doing wrong, and know that God will be behind us no matter what. Because even if they do get control, they know that God's got our back. Like I said, if they do and the world becomes like this, it will be the end. We may be living in the end of times. There are a lot of people I know that believe that very, very, very sincerely. So we got to do that. We have to get at them and just make sure we get the truth out. We have to fight back and let light shine into this darkness, because this is all dark and evil. So I'm going to stop there. My last podcast will be on the concepts of truth and concepts of hope. We're going to end up on a more positive note. And everybody be safe out there with Halloween. And this is Dr. Tony Maglione on Political Pulse. And we'll see you next time.